Geschätzte Damen und Herren, es freut mich sehr, dass Sie derart zahlreich erschienen sind. Mein Name ist Samuel Leder, ich bin Program Manager für Urban Management für diverse Kursformate am CUREM, dem Center for Urban and Real Estate Management an der Universität Zürich. Ich begrüße Sie ganz herzlich zu unserer heutigen CUREMpubliclecture zum Thema Placemaking, Building Community Around People. Around Place. Placemaking, Building Community Around Place mit People. Der bekannte Architekturkritiker und Stadtwanderer Benedikt Loderer hat vor rund 10 Jahren die Begriffe der Gebrauchsschweiz und der Schönschweiz geprägt. Mit der Schönschweiz bezeichnete er all diese Postkartensujets, die Sehnsuchts- und Identifikationsorte, auf die wir Schweizer ja besonders stolz sind. Seien es die eher pittoresk ländlichen oder eher die urban hippen. Der deutlich größere Teil unserer Alltagsrealität spielt sich aber nicht in der Schönschweiz ab, sondern in der Gebrauchsschweiz. Sieht dann meistens eher so aus. Das sind ganze Landstriche von gesichts- und charakterlosen Siedlungsräumen, häufig entstanden aus zufällig sich überlagerten funktionalen Überlegungen oder aus rein praktischen Notwendigkeiten. Diese Räume sind Spaces, aber keine Places. Also Räume, die funktionieren, aber die eben nicht diese Identität vermitteln, über die man sich identifiziert mit dem Ort. Benedikt Loderer sagt dann, dass wir die Lebensfeindlichkeit dieser Gebrauchsschweiz verdrängen. Und zwar, je hässlicher unsere effektive Wohn- oder Lebensumgebung, desto stärker identifizieren wir uns mit der idealisierten Schönschweiz. Ja, wir kennen das Musealisierung pittoresker Bauerndörfer oder Gentrifizierung von begehrten Stadtteilen. Der Druck auf diese wenigen Orte der Schönschweiz wächst dementsprechend. Was ist die Lösung? Was können wir tun in dieser Situation? Anstelle einfach zu versuchen, die Schönschweiz mit kulissenartiger Architektur zu replizieren, ist die Schlüsselfrage aus unserer Sicht vielmehr, wie können wir unsere Gebrauchsschweiz lebenswerter gestalten? Der Placemaking-Ansatz bietet genau hierfür ein neues Paradigma und ein breites Instrumentarium. Anstelle zusätzlicher planerischer Vorgaben fokussiert dieser Ansatz auf die Stärkung zivilgesellschaftlicher Akteure vor Ort und die Einbindung sogenannter Local Heroes. Dadurch können sozial eng vernetzte und auch authentische Nachbarschaften entstehen. Durch Einbezug und Befähigung fürsorglicher und lokal gut vernetzter und verankerter Kümmerer entsteht nach und nach ein ausgesprochen wohnliches Umfeld, welches dann auch räumlich und baulich attraktiver werden kann. Wir freuen uns außerordentlich, dass wir mit Hans Karssenberg heute einen der Pioniere und Vordenker der europäischen Placemaking-Bewegung hier haben. Er wird uns in seinem Referat einen Einblick, eine Einführung in seine Tätigkeit und in seinen Erfahrungsschatz geben. Zum Ablauf der heutigen Mittagsveranstaltung: Unser Referent Hans Karssenberg wird uns in etwa 40 Minuten eine Einführung zum Placemaking-Ansatz geben. Anschließend werden wir noch Zeit haben für einige Diskussionsfragen und können dann ab ca. 13:15 Uhr beim Stehlunch im Lichthof weiter austauschen. Das heutige Referat wird auch aufgezeichnet und steht zusammen mit den Folien in einigen Tagen auf der Website des CUREM-Instituts zur Verfügung. Nun begrüßen Sie mit mir mit einem herzlichen Applaus unseren heutigen Referenten, Gast aus den Niederlanden, Hans Karssenberg.
Thank you very much. See if my microphone is working. Yeah? Okay, perfect. Thank you, and how amazing that you all showed up with so many people. I hope it shows something of the interest in the topic of placemaking.
For sure. I'll just introduce you with a few words. Hans Karssenberg hat bereits im Rahmen seines Studiums in Stadtplanung in den frühen 90er Jahren das Stadtentwicklungsbüro und Beratungsbüro STIPO gegründet. In den letzten Jahrzehnten haben sie ganz viele Städte öffentlicher Hand beraten, unter anderem Amsterdam, Rotterdam oder die australische Stadt Melbourne und auch für diverse Projektentwickler, Investoren, Gewerbevereine oder Anwohnervereine Prozesse begleitet und sie beim Community Building unterstützt. Seit rund 10 Jahren engagieren sich Hans und sein mittlerweile gewachsenes Team zudem aktiv für den internationalen Wissenstransfer, unter anderem mit Trainingsseminaren in Europa, Asien, Nord- und Südamerika und mit einer Bücherserie mit dem Titel The City at Eye Level, welche auch online kostenlos als PDF heruntergeladen werden kann. Darüber hinaus ist Hans Vorstand in Placemaking Europe, dem europäischen Dachverband und dem globalen Placemaking-X Network. Und er ist auch Mitinitiator des Stadtmarkersfonds, einem Impact-Investment-Fonds, welcher das Investitionskapital für Placemaking-basierte Projektentwicklungen zur Verfügung stellt. Seit 2021 ist er Dozent in verschiedenen CUREM-Kursformaten. Hans, it's a great honor to have you here with us today and to share a tiny bit of your knowledge and the many amazing stories that you have experienced and collected from your years as a professional placemaker. Thank you, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Samuel. And first of all, thank you for allowing me to do this in English. I will try to speak clearly. If you don't understand something, then please ask. Because unfortunately my German, I have a passive German knowledge being a Dutch speaker, but my active German, even especially in professional field, is not that good. So I hope you bear with me in English for this hour. Thank you for your wonderful introduction. I don't think I could have said it any better. We call ourselves a team for better cities, and we work on area development, area transformation a lot. And the reason why we got started is exactly because of those pictures that Samuel was showing, because of course the grass is always greener on the other side, and then you tend to think that everything is wonderful in the Netherlands, but it's not. I could show a lot of those bleak pictures of development as well, and I would say 80–90% of the development happening in the Netherlands is more in that category, unfortunately. And we think we need to do better. We think we need to do more in the category that will be long-lasting quality, it will have great public space, and will have a lot of social qualities and not just only physical qualities. And that's really for us where placemaking comes in. Placemaking for us is not a marketing tool. It does help to bring an area to life, but it's not in essence a marketing tool. Placemaking for us is not a tool for beautification or for creating beautiful public spaces only. We hope that the public spaces and the areas will have beauty as well. But foremost and most important of all, for us it's a tool to create social quality, people meeting each other, communities, creating communities around place, getting people involved in their own environment, asking them to start co-investing. So we will have a lot of examples in this coming 40 minutes to share with you on how you can do that. And well, let's start with a practical example. One of our many cases is the case of ZOHO in the city of Rotterdam. The area was called the Zomerhofstraat in Dutch. And yeah, of course, we couldn't help ourselves, so we decided to call the area ZOHO. Sometimes you need a catchy name a little bit as well. But this is an area in the city of Rotterdam, quite centrally located. Before the war, it used to be a very nice residential neighborhood. Then, of course, during the war, Rotterdam was bombed, right? The inner city was bombed. And after the war, the city decided to redevelop this area as an office area for the harbor activities. And by the time we got started in this area was basically dead. It was in the end of the 90s, beginning 2000. The offices weren't there anymore. There was a lot of vacancy, and this is really what the buildings were looking like. Lots of deterioration. The streets were all really dead facades on the ground floor. So the city at eye level, as we like to call it, right? That's the city you experience around you was not a very pleasant experience. People didn't dare to walk through and cycle through the area at night anymore. But we saw an opportunity in this because we also realized that in Rotterdam there's a lot of young startup entrepreneurs that cannot find a place, social enterprises, manufacturers, young creatives, city makers as we like to call them, who were all more or less complaining that they couldn't find affordable space in the city and were leaving the city of Rotterdam, which is very negative for the city's economy, of course, if your young talents have to leave because there's no space. So we couldn't understand why this area was standing empty so much, and while at the same time, young creatives couldn't find a place in the city. So we wanted to make that connection. We proposed to the building owner, it's a housing corporation called Havenstede, to start a process that we called slow urbanism, but you can also call it placemaking, a different approach to development. It was also in the past credit crisis, so they really didn't know what to do with their buildings anymore, and we helped them to fill them back up, tapping into those communities. So I think most importantly, we really built a community of temporary tenants with some rules. I won't go into it too deeply now, but one of the rules was that it's going to be for temporary use, but it's going to be for 10 years, because then you invite the community to start co-investing into the area. Part of the idea or the vision for the area was that it should come back to life, not only by the community of new tenants coming into the buildings, but also by the buildings opening themselves up, the city at eye level coming back to life again. So one rule we had for the people who came in is that you can be in the building, but you have to open up your ground floor. You have to do something with it. And if you can't open it up, maybe do some painting or bring it back to life. We also we had a long-term vision for the area, but in this case, we also said, yeah, that vision is never going to happen if we don't build a community and we don't build the trust, and you build trust with the community by doing stuff, right? By getting results done on a short term. So somebody said, there's not enough green in the area, I would like to create facade gardens, as we call them. And the week after, we were creating the facade garden. So a very hands-on idea of there's an initiative popping up. You immediately say yes to that initiative, and you build the energy from that, because then people see, if I come with an idea, it's actually going to happen, and then people will start dreaming bigger. And because we were part of the network, also all sorts of ideas were starting to come to us through the network that if you would write a master plan in more traditional planning, right? You would be writing a master plan first, and you would have it adopted by the politicians, and you would implement it. That's kind of the more linear project way that we do development a lot. I would have never been able to come up with the idea that came to us, because this piece of land, nobody really knew what to do with it. There was a chef in the area who said, yeah, he had been cooking. There's a low-income area next door with lots of unhealthy kids, and he had been doing workshops for the kids to teach them to eat healthily more. And he said, yeah, I would like to start my restaurant based on this principle. I would like to actually employ the unemployed kids from the low-income neighborhood into the service of that restaurant. I would like to grow my own herbs and vegetables in the garden in front of my restaurant. And then we said, yeah, that's all fine, but you don't have a building. And he said, yeah, but by the way, I also collect trains. And he really meant trains. We thought, midlife crisis, he's still playing with trains, but he really meant trains. So somehow, and this is the guy, the chef over here, you can maybe tell by his belly a little bit, that's what a chef should look like, right? Hans Kervenzee. Apparently he owns 40 train wagons somewhere. And he had a former East German restoration wagon that he said, can't this be my restaurant? We'll call it Gare du Nord. A German name is a bit sensitive in Rotterdam, maybe. But he called it Gare du Nord. And he employed the kids from the neighborhood. The train was never vandalized. And he turned that bleak space, this was public space officially, he turned that bleak space into a place, right? So I guess that's a very important thing in placemaking, is that you open up to surprises. You generate a network, and people will start coming to you with their ideas, and you leave room for that, because this I could have never imagined to write down in a master plan beforehand. This is a much more organic approach, and because people saw this happening, other people get more energy to start investing into the area, and then energy builds on energy. Changing the buildings around, we got a lot of initiatives to us. This was a school, very deep building, nobody really knew what to do with. And we got these two guys who said, yeah, we would like to start a hostel, the cheapest hostel in Rotterdam here. It's called the Weirdo, the Mafkees in Rotterdam slang. For 15 euros you sleep there and you get breakfast. They really saw it, they really were right. But of course they thought, two young guys starting from their attic, there's an empty building, we have a business idea, we get the key and we start tomorrow. But I guess there's a lot of people here in the room who understand that if you change a school building to a place where people sleep, you need to go through the fire regulations, right? How long does it normally take to go through those fire regulation permits? At least, right? 6 months. Normally in the Netherlands, a year and a half. We had the municipality on board. They made it happen within 3 months' time. So we thought it was very, very fast. But the initiative, they almost already left because they thought every week they were asking this, can we start already? So there's always a difference between the kind of the idea about time with the initiatives and the idea about time in the planning offices, right? So it turned into this place, and because that happened, people sit in front of the building again, and the street comes a little bit back to life, and because that happened with all the buildings in the area turned from this to this more, and also build new energy from other investors to start opening up their buildings. Now, this was the building we were in ourselves. We also got into the area ourselves. We wanted to be part of the community very much with our office. And, well, we like the building, but it really has one problem. If you have written a series of books called The City at Eye Level, there is no door here on the front where you could open the eye level of the building, the ground floor, right? So we made a deal with the building owner that we said, well, would you be happy if we could fill it up again? Because when we entered, it was only 20% filled up. And we made a deal that would you be happy if we fill it up with 50% tenants? And they said, yeah, it's going to be difficult because we never managed to do that. Then we said, would you be happy if we could fill it up with 75%? And they said, yeah, but you will never get there. Okay, we said, then can we make a deal that if we fill it up with more than 75% tenants, the last 25 rent doesn't go into your general funds, but goes into a fund to reinvest into the building, because we knew we want to invest into a door, among others, right? To open up the city at eye level. They said, yeah, because you will never make that happen anyway. 2 months later, we had the building 100% filled up, and we started saving money, and we got our door. And it's a small change, but it meant that there was a cafe immediately, a very innovative cafe, who said, we would like to be here. And then, of course, the cafe started to use the little space in front of the building, putting out little chairs and tables. And then we thought, do we really need this entire parking space here? So as a test, we started a little rain garden because we didn't have the money to change this entire space. So we started a little rain garden. The former alcoholics were doing the management of this garden. It was one of the most beautiful rain gardens in Rotterdam for a long time. But also up on that poster you see up there, we put an image of what this place could look like if we did the entire park. And then at some point we gave a tour, it was November, to the people from the municipality. And they said, of course, it's November, you know what then happens. We still have budget left and we're going to lose it if we don't spend it before the end of the year. Hey, that picture looks nice, couldn't we do that in this park here? So then all of a sudden we had an entire rain park in front of the building. And I hope you get from this story that you start with a facade garden, and that builds the community, and then the community comes with the next initiative, then you open up the ground floors, and it's a kind of an accumulation of small investments and leading to larger and larger investments. And because you do that with all the buildings and with all the area comes to life. Now, what this also led to is that the value of this single building, we calculated, went up from 500,000 in the beginning to 3.5 million euros 3 years later. Because a lot of the value, of course, is determined by the amount of tenants in the building and by the time of the rental contracts and by the vibrancy of the area as well. In the end, the Housing Corporation sold this area for redevelopment, embracing, by the way, the community, embracing the ideas that we had generated, so they're embedded in the more permanent development, and they sold this building for 6 million euros. So, and there's both good news and bad news in there. Placemaking does lead to gentrification, but it also leads to value creation. And then the question, of course, is how can you use that value creation to invest that back into the community and not let the community be driven away from the area. So fortunately, part of the tender idea is that that community that had created the success of the area is allowed to stay. So there will be commercial spaces as well as dwellings in the area on top of the existing buildings. This is an impression of what it will look like. But half the economic spaces will be affordable for the local makers, manufacturers, and social enterprises to be able to stay there and not be driven from the area. Part of the houses will be affordable to make the relationship with the low-income neighborhood next door, so that it doesn't become a just only exclusive area. So some steps we did since learning, building on this project. We've been active, among others, in the transformation of an area, a former business area, that now has 2,500 dwellings, using the same principles, organized around creating a community which we call the Club Rijnhuizen. So we never want to do boring participation. We want people to actually like to come there, right? And a club is something that you join because you like it. And in the club are the residents of the area, but also the real estate developers, the politicians, the urban planners, the people with a crazy initiative. They all are part of that community. We eat together for 4 times a year, and during the dinners, everybody finds out that they are people and they have the same interests, and a lot of new ideas come from that. And this is, by the way, all independently paid for by the development of the area, because we knew now that there's so much value created out of these placemaking processes. Another area we're working on at the moment is an area in Utrecht, large-scale area development with 6,000 dwellings. And we allow a very high density to be realized there, provided that the developers also invest a lot into great city at eye level and good public space and a high social quality. So we put that in the frameworks of the area, and then now I'm also part of the quality team that is judging the development plans on those criteria with the power to say no to plans if they don't provide. And a third step that happened came out of the ZOHO experience is that you should actually encourage placemakers to get from temporary to a more permanent position, because they have a more permanent value for an area as well. And in order to do that, you need to allow them to buy their own land or buildings, which placemakers are very often not capable of doing because they have no track record, they don't know how to sell their financial story to a bank, so they will never get a loan from a bank. So you need different investment mechanisms to sustain these placemaking efforts and turn them from temporary to permanent. Okay, those are some examples from practice. Maybe it's nice to look a little bit at what's underneath it. Because this doesn't just fall out of the air. It's not only our gut feeling that we followed, there is a large body of knowledge behind this. And one of the key ideas here is that you don't just only build functional spaces. How did you call it? The Gebrauchsweise. So the very functional side of things, which you also need to do in a correct way, but it's not enough. You also want the place to be inspiring, right? And in order to achieve that, you need informal spaces. You need to bring that living room feeling to the outside, rather than it being very formal. In the pictures you showed, the public space is super formal, right? You need it to be incomplete in the sense that you invite the users to start co-investing. I'll give an example later on. You want very intimate spaces, smaller places where people really feel at home, they feel sheltered. And you want them to be inclusive, because public space is never nice if it's only dominated by one user group. You want a variety of user groups to be there. And if you get it right, then the place will also be very innovative, socially innovative, as well as economically innovative. There's a lot of research going on now by Brookings Institution about how the best innovation districts have great meeting spaces and public spaces between them, and they need placemaking, basically. So it's only 5 eyes, really, that you should remember, 1 eye for every finger you have. So I hope you can use this slide in your own work. And of course, the presentation is available for whoever would like to have it. Behind this idea, and we use more criteria, more tools, of course. This was just one of them. Behind this is a very extensive body of knowledge of thinkers, theorists, people who also worked in practice, starting with Kevin Lynch, going to Christopher Alexander, and ending with Jeff Speck and Ray Oldenburg. And they all discussed various elements that we now use in this body of knowledge called placemaking. So it's not something that just came about now. It's not a trendy subject that is completely new. It has been around already since the 1960s, and it has been researched and deeply written about. One of the key authors is William White. So I wanted to highlight him a little bit. And he wrote this, he was a sociologist. So he really, for the first time, there's a lot of literature about public space saying that people should behave in a certain way according to an ideology. He got rid of all the ideology, and he, for the first time as a researcher, started researching what is it that people actually do in public space. Just observe what they do. He placed these time-lapse cameras on tops of office buildings, pointed them at squares, and based his analysis on those kinds of observations. And he wrote this wonderful book called The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces. You can find it on the internet. And I always say nobody here should ever be allowed to do anything in public space anymore until you've read that book. And the good thing, it's not that big, so and it's very well written. So just use your next weekend to find the book and to read it, please. Some elements of his thinking. What he found is that public spaces are built of a set of basic elements, really, good public spaces, if you look at them through the eyes of the user. People like food. They like to eat an ice cream. They like places to sit. They like places to watch other people. If you don't have any benches on the square, it's not going to work. They like to enjoy the water and dip their toe into the water. They like to be in the sun in milder climates or in the shade in warmer climates. They like active programming, things to do, and a sense of scale. And if you get it right on a square, you have lots of things happening at the same time so that the users start interacting with the other users, and that's what we call triangulation. So he says it's very hard to design a space that will not attract people, but what is remarkable is how often that has been accomplished. And the upper square here, the lower square is just a historic square in the city of Stockholm, for instance. You have your squares here as well that function like this. The upper square is a very designed square in Boston, in front of the town hall. And what they did is they thought, what is the best square in the world? It's the Campo in Siena. Let's copy it. But they copied the form and not the use. So they forgot about the users. So it's lying there and it's completely dead. It's not working. If you want to see the place with activity, just put out food, just ice creams. He also noted that benches are artifacts, the purpose of which is to punctuate architecture photographs, but they're not so good for sitting, unfortunately, most of the time. We get these catalog benches, right, that are designed not to let homeless people sleep there, but then nobody wants to sit there anymore because they're super uncomfortable at the same time. So there's a whole science about the quality of benches in the book, super important, and shows you that you really start at that small human scale level. Some of the best benches we discovered was on Paris Plage, right? The Paris activation of the River Seine bank. And look at this. This is a bench that is wide enough for people to sit on both ends. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We never know what that woman is doing. Maybe 9 groups of people using the same bench. What you of course get is that these elderly women, they pretend as if they're drinking their coffees and having a conversation, but they're of course listening in to the conversation of the young women next to them. That's what we like to do. And then of course the best is movable furniture, right? Like the Jardin de Luxembourg, and we see that happening in more and more places, thankfully. There's a lot of other lessons that dive into that body of knowledge. Let's now shift to our practice and see how can we use these lessons and these insights in our own work. So, first of all, we say it's very important in any urban development to really start to think from the future city at eye level. What we get a lot right in designs is that we get the bird's eye pictures of the future designs. You know them. I guess your architects, your developers, you use them probably, right? But there's only one problem: we're not birds. We're not up in the air. We're down here. We're on the ground, and that's where we experience the city. So of course you need the bird's eye view in development, but you need to combine that with what is it going to look like when we walk there, when we walk around and we look around us and see what's happening. So for us, that also means that public space is not limited only to the space the city owns. It's a three-dimensional place that includes the facades of buildings, because they're part of your experience, and then especially the ground floor is very important. Fred Kent, one of the leaders of the placemaking movement, would even say architects should not be allowed to design the ground floors of buildings. It should be done by the shops and the users of the ground floors themselves, because then you get a great variety, then they will put their love in, then you don't get those bleak facades that you see everywhere. And if you want to do this, you should really start from the point of view of the individual experience, the user of the public space. You and I walking down the street, right? And there's a whole body of knowledge again in environmental psychology, in urban psychology, that we then use, learn from, and translate to the criteria for urban development. For instance, this is work conducted by Jan Geel, and the A streets are very vibrant streets. Let's say the first picture you showed. The B streets are boring streets, the second picture you showed. And then Jan Geel counts how often do people turn their heads while they're walking down the street, because it means that something interesting is happening on the side. They will slow down their pace and spend more time in the street. And in good streets, people turn their heads 87 times. In the boring streets, of course, you work faster and you don't even look at the side, and you might only turn your head 5 times. So really going into that kind of basic human behavior, we know how people watch, we know how people hear, and then what that means for the translation to create a comfortable space. So that, for instance, means that you don't want to create a block that is designed like that. You could say there's an attempt to create a city at eye level there by using a different color on the facade, but it's very open and bleak. Whereas here you see a facade garden. The city here allows the users to take out the first tile out of the sidewalk. They come and help you, provided you create a nice garden. And what you then see happening is that people start competing with their neighbors for who has the most beautiful facade garden, right? And that brings a lot of human skill and signs of soul of the street and people taking care of the street. And of course, on a larger scale, that also means that if we design an area, we don't start with the buildings, we start with the public space. The public space should really be the backbone of any urban development. This is a development we did in Utrecht for the Beurskwartier, large-scale development, where we first analyzed how can we link the various public space networks together, and then how can we build the plan from there. So first life, then space, then buildings, as Jan Geel says, and not the other way around, which is very often how we do it, and which results in the pictures we had in the beginning. So this eye-level experience is the first notion that we would take out. The second, really, is to integrate and activate the local community. Every urban development is an opportunity to create and to enhance a community, or to tap into existing communities who are already there. And for this, we use the insights of the Maslow pyramid of basic human needs. First, you need to have shelter, you need to be safe, and only if you have that, then you want to be inspire, you start thinking about your relationships, about self-development, etc., right? You could relate this to public space, because what we normally do with the municipality and with developers is that we create space. We create a space that is safe, clean, and that is whole and is functional and easy to maintain. But that's not a place yet. A place is inspiring, is fun, is social, is active. And in order to achieve that, you really need the community to start co-investing. You need both. It's not either or, you need both. So we're building strong social networks in the areas that we work in that are long-lasting. We don't do what we now started to call the cuckoo clock participation. We make a plan as professionals. We let people participate, the cuckoo comes out, and then we withdraw again, the doors close again, and it's a black box, and people never hear from us again. That's kind of the one-off participation that we normally do, right, in urban development. We really build networks, longer-lasting, like an area cooperative of this Club Rijnhuizen. We have dinner together. We do that 4 times a year, and we do that for 7 years in a row, and that's how we develop an area. And then you will see that those are the seeds of a future community in the area living there. And a future community also involved in great public space in the area and great activities. And that all begins by, if you work in an area, and we were just talking about it, identifying who are the local heroes, who are the ones that are the informal leaders in the network, who are the ones who have the crazy ideas. Because they are the ones that will come up with the idea to put a train somewhere, to start growing vegetables. We would never come up with that idea. You need a community for that. And allow the community to co-create the place. So don't let the space be only developed by the developer and the designer, but let it also parts open so that the community can co-create elements of it. Not everything, but elements of it. So the city at eye level perspective, building communities as an aim in itself, right? Second. And then the third key takeaway would be that requires for us to design the process of development differently. Here we are in a square in Deventer. And the city had just taken out all the cars there. Until then, it was a big parking space. The city didn't know what to do with it. And they asked us, can you make a participation and then tell us what to do with the square? And we said, well, let's not do a regular participation night where you invite people to come to the city hall, because you will only get a certain selection of people. You know, the people who have time to come there, who are networked, they will raise their voice. But that's only a very small portion of the actual uses of such a space. So using anthropological research, and we also have anthropologists in our team even, we proposed to put a caravan on the square and sleep there. And what happened is that the young kids hanging out on the square, they came to us because they were curious, what is this caravan doing here? Can we get some drinks? And then you get into a conversation. The homeless people, they came to us and asked, hey, this was our place, what are you doing here? The neighbors living around the corner, they came and brought breakfast in the morning because they were a little bit concerned that, are you guys doing all right here? And you get into these wonderful conversations. You spend like 48 hours on the square, and you get a very deep understanding of what the community is like, who are the key people, what their desires are, and then you can build a plan. And these are all people who would never come to that participation night. So design the process differently, and that also means the process of implementation. Don't make a plan for 3 years and then implement it all at once. Start making small investments and learn from those, a much more iterative way to develop, like in the ZOHO case, and then build on the successes and make them larger. The city of Milan has now used that, the tactical urbanism program. They changed 40 squares around to people-friendly squares with the local communities in 3 years' time, using this tactic. At first, they just get out the cars. If a community wants it, only then. They get out the cars, they use paint, they use cheap furniture, so that if it doesn't work, you just reverse it, and you haven't spent a lot of money. But if it's a success, they come back after a couple of years and then make it more permanent. So this is a different approach to urban development that's much more prototyping, learning from the first investments, and then building on those. And at the end of the day, in order to do this, you need to think about not only what we call the hardware, which is the design, and the software, which is the uses and activities, right? So I hope you got that. That was a very Dutch sorry. We always look at both, right? We look at the hardware as well as the software, and we let the software also feed the ideas about the hardware. But because urban development is often a long-lasting process, you need to think about the third part of the triangle, which is the orgware. How do you organize the community on the longer term instead of that cuckoo clock participation? So this is I talked very briefly about this area cooperative, right, in this transformation area with all the residents, and we eat together. But there is a financial model behind it to make it independently viable. So actually the real estate developers, they all chip in, because they said, well, we realized that for us this is not a cost, it's an investment. But we're only going to invest, there's about 80 real estate developers present in the area, we're only going to invest if everybody needs to invest, because we don't want to sponsor our competitors, of course. So we built this system where through the area contribution, a portion of that was going into the area cooperative and was invested back into building the future community of the area. And that led to a lot of faster pace in the transformation, better ideas, and a stronger community in the area, and better places. So to conclude with, we have now this phenomenon that we call placemakers. And who is a placemaker? You might ask yourself, am I a placemaker? I'm hoping you will say yes. Because we work with investors, developers, designers and planners, public authorities, people working for municipalities, activists and the local community. And we hope that everybody will use placemaking as a mindset. Placemaking is not something you achieve by only using the nice bottom-up initiatives and inviting them to your area. It's also achieved by developers and designers embracing the ideas, the deeper ideas behind placemaking, because you don't only want it on the short term in a temporary basis, you want it on the longer term in an area as values as well. We need to really get our development to do that differently, and we need everybody on board of that. So we would hope that all of you would say, after this lecture, hopefully, I would like to be a placemaker. And then a great start is maybe the social life of small urban spaces, and you can download the CD at I Love Books as well. And then secondly, if you start that process, you start with a small placemaking process, then you start to think about maybe how you can embrace that in your development process. And those development processes, of course, are very often longer lasting, especially if it's larger scale areas, right? Like the area transformations and the area developments that we are in. Those are 10, 15 years. Placemaking should be part of the process in every step of the way, not just only at the beginning or the end. If you don't think about the way you build high-rise, for instance, you're going to get these flat facades, and it's going to catch the wind here, which we have a lot in the Netherlands, in our climate. It's going to bring down the wind to the public space, and the public space will never be comfortable for the users. So you need to be there when the shapes of the buildings are designed, because otherwise you won't have good public space, right? So every step of the way, you want to have this idea of what we like to call place-led development. And then after that, you would want to lead that to a community that is longer lasting, that is involved in the area, that keeps developing the area over time, and that then becomes a kind of a place management community, where they keep activating the public space, keep organizing activities together, and keep that social quality of the area going. So we think about the organization mechanisms every step of the way and how to get that done in urban development. Some links if you would like to know more. There's much more on our own website. By the way, Milan, we're organizing a metropolitan field trip to next week. So in case you don't have to do anything next week and you would like to visit those 50 squares, then please come with us. We have all the books downloadable. And we have this network called Placemaking Europe. 5,000 people active now throughout all countries of Europe. There's a very active Facebook page, for instance. If you ask a question there, you get an answer from 20 corners of Europe the next day. It's wonderful. And with the Placemaking Europe group, we also have a toolbox of the various tools that you can use in the various stages of the process. Super hands-on manuals that you can just download for free and use in your own practice. So hopefully you will find a lot of extra knowledge over there as well. Thank you very much. And I think we were right on the clock there, Samuel, right?
Yes.
So, well
Thank
done.
you so much for this amazing introduction. I think to many here it was completely new, or at least a lot of new things. Jetzt haben wir noch Zeit für einige Fragen. Man kann auch gerne Fragen auf Deutsch stellen und ich werde dann versuchen, die zu übersetzen, also was einfacher geht. Gibt es gerade aus dem Publikum eine? Ja.
Ja, of course.
Jetzt kommt gerade das Mikrofon noch. Der Stadtmarkersfonds.
Yeah, okay.
Who was funding, or is the municipality involved, or is it on city scale, or is it just a one-site project?
Yeah, right now we got this fund started with the help of a province, actually. So not the municipal, in the Netherlands, between the municipality and the national government, we have the provinces. The province of Utrecht is the largest scale entity here. They borrowed 1 million euros to the fund to reinvest into the cases of stadmakers, city makers, or placemakers. And we helped by now 5 cases to grow from temporary to permanent. That was the first step. We're super happy that the government stuck its neck out and to be the first investor behind this. It's not money to give away, right? It's money we invest, so the placemakers are paying it back, and then we are paying back the province. So it's not a subsidy, it's just a loan that we get for good circumstances, and we then rent it grant those loans to the initiatives for like 3.5%, so that they can keep working on their social impact as well, because that's the key thing, of course. They create a lot of social impact in their areas. Now that we have that going, we open up the fund to private investors to step in as well. So we see ourselves as matchmakers between initiatives on the one hand and investors, both public as well as private investors on the other hand. And that's why it's good to have a separate fund. It's an NGO, a stichting in Dutch, a foundation, so that we can make that match and we can both use private money as well as public money. And there is a lot of interest on the private side as well, now that we have got the first projects funded and people can see it, to accept that they don't get the maximum interest back on their money, but they want to use some part of their money to invest in an impactful way. So they use the fund to do that. So I think it should be possible to start this in the context of Switzerland as well. And I think maybe, I believe the Edith Marion Stiftung is here. They're doing more or less similar things, but really these type of investments we learned from the Trios Stiftung in Germany that is doing that in a very active way. So we more or less learned from the model and copied it to the Netherlands. So what I think is the essence here is that if you don't think about the more permanent investments in placemaking projects, placemakers are very passionate, are very naive when it comes to money, and that very often means that after 3 years they will need to stop. And you would want them to carry on what they're doing on the longer term and help them to a more sound social enterprise type business case. They can make profit, but they reinvest that profit into the impact they're making. So I don't know if that answers your question. No, so there is a lack of financial infrastructure to make these initiatives grow. I think that's what is the case, and I think that's more what's happening here at large. Why we end up with those bleak areas is because we need to change the entire system in order to get to a different point of development, we believe. And these are all elements of that.
Thank you. There's another question.
And at the moment we are trying to do such a placemaking process with a street, Statel Street, that is given up. And we have the money, and we have people that care about the projects of the people, but people that don't come up with project. Do you think that placemaking belongs to real urban environment, and that it's more difficult at edge cities or non-urban environments?
It's a very good question, because I realize that we often use the examples from larger scale cities like Rotterdam or Amsterdam or Utrecht. But we're also involved in placemaking projects in small towns. And what I find very often in small towns is that maybe in the larger cities, the question might be, where do you find space in the process of rising prices? Where do you find space for this alternative kind of development, right? So it's more a bit of a fight to find a place. Very often in the smaller towns and communities, it's a question that who is going to invest into that place, right? You see shrinking cities, you see a lot more vacancy, but at the same time, in the smaller communities, you very often see that they're very strong at the same time as well. There's a lot of sense of community, maybe even more so than in the cities. So if you manage to tap into that sense of community that is there locally, and you have enough time, then ideas will come up at some point. And maybe it's just enough to start very small with planting flowers. We also start with the petunias, and because if you start there and people see results, then you will notice that we'll start having bigger ideas. Placemaking, there's one thing about placemaking, it's you can't plan it. You can't say, I'm an urban planner, right? I was trained to plan for things, that in quarter 3 we have this result. And that's also what you promise to your politicians and how you get money for your projects, right? Placemaking doesn't need planning, it needs timing. Sometimes you need to be just waiting if there's no initiatives at all, because if you then step in and take it over, it's going to kill any further initiative, right? And that's maybe a little bit the situation where you're now, I'm sensing. But once an initiative comes up, like the guys with the hostel, you need to be super fast to act on it, because otherwise you're going to lose them. So I think placemaking is more about timing than about planning. But my experience is that we can find people with an initiative in any community. Just by talking one-on-one to the people, really diving in and really opening up to the community. But I don't know your exact situation, but my answer would be, we find that there's placemaking is not just a big city thing, it is happening a lot in small town communities as well. We have small villages that see the last supermarket disappearing, for instance, and who say, yeah, that supermarket for us is not just only a place where we buy our daily stuff, it's also a social gathering place. It's one of the few left still in our village. So they started a cooperative to buy over the supermarket and run it with each other. That's a very strong sense of community, and that I would call a placemaking project, right? So I hope you will have the time, you will be allowed the time by your politicians to make those initiatives grow. Which community is this? Is there anybody from there? We need you before October.
Yeah.
So also, I think that's the other element to this. We tried not to think in projects. We already develop those networks before a project even starts. We could act in ZOHO because we were already in the networks of all those young entrepreneurs years before. And then you can act fast. So it takes time to build a community. So I hope you can take my message back to your director and ask him for some more time.
And also it's great to see the creative approaches how to identify local heroes or to get to know people that would not turn up if you tell them, come to us, like the caravan on the square. I think that's a very iconic image to show that there may be ideas out there how to approach people or find the right people.
Maybe you still have time to rent a caravan in the next couple of weeks. And we use the ugliest 70s carpets. And like it should really stand out, the caravan. So go for the ugly one, I would recommend. Because then you raise the curiosity of people, right? And this is only one of the many tools that we use, but you want to raise the curiosity, be in the place where the people are, use their curiosity, and then you will get into a conversation, no matter where you are, no matter which community you're in, no matter which country you're in. People like to talk and people are curious.
There was another question there on the back. Is it okay? But not actual anymore. Then more questions? Yeah.
Hi. I notice as cities are more and more diverse, so there's many people from different places. And how do you manage to motivate different people with different backgrounds and languages to participate? But what I notice here is sometimes difficult that people come around to participate, to do something, because it's a language barrier that is very difficult sometimes.
Yeah. I happen to work in one of those communities for the past 2 years in the west of Amsterdam. It's one of the lowest income neighborhoods in Amsterdam with a 90% migrant population, in the Netherlands predominantly Moroccan origin. But lots of other cultures as well. When I talk to the people there, they might not call it placemaking. I don't even use the word placemaking there. But they do say we have very strong social networks. We help each other out, and we would like to see that more in public space. We would like the public space to be more social. We need a meeting place. That's what a lot of people say. So there is a lot of initiative. The only thing is that there's a lot of households there that I will never make my way into because they would never allow me to. And then for me, the trick in an area like this is to find my way to the informal leaders, to find my way to the local heroes. So I don't know, we had that picture where I talked a little bit about local heroes. Literally, there's Nadia Aktaoud there. She has lived in the area for 20 years. She more or less grew up there. And for 10 years now, she has been active as a volunteer to organize evenings for the lonely elderly people, Moroccan people in the neighborhood, and for the women who don't have anything to do and to teach their language skills. So she is in those networks already. And it's not my role to find my way to the people in those networks. It's my role, I think, to let Nadia take that role. There's Fouad Lekbier there, who is also, again, born and raised in this neighborhood, and who knows a lot of other parts of the community there. And we did, for instance, we are now in the process of physical regeneration of the houses. 700 houses will be regenerated, either torn down and rebuilt or be renovated, owned by a housing corporation. Normally, in a process like that, you would rent an external communication office to come in and do the participation among the tenants. We said, let's not spend that money on such an external office. Let's spend the money on Fouad and Nadia. Let's ask them to do the participation for us. And they reached 400 people out of 1,700 to actively participate in the future plans for the area. And they're now shaping networks to activate them on the short term for public space as well. So I think really I find it's always crucial to find those informal leaders, or in placemaking we also like to call them zealous nuts, because they don't realize what's not possible, like putting a train in public space, and they make the impossible happen. The local heroes are even more important in communities like these, and that takes time. I did a lot of one-on-one walks in the area before I even got to the point where we could start making a plan with them. I think that took a year to build that up. So again, I hope you have a director or a politician that allows you to take that time and to find your way to those informal networks and give them the role. I don't know if this gives you an answer, but and we find it very important that placemaking is not seen as a hipster process. Bring out the deck chairs, put out cappuccinos for €5, right? We love the urban beaches. I love to go there. But we want to create communities around places that are very inclusive and where you can also be, if you don't have €5 to pay, and engage in an activity. So it's super important to engage with all parts of society and not just the parts that already come to the participation nights.
Okay, so we have time for one last question, I think.
Dankjewel, Hans. Vielen Dank, Samuel, dass du Hans hierher gebracht hast. Kees ist mein Name, nicht Mafkees, dass es klar ist. Vielen Dank für deine Inspiration und ich denke, du hast viele Leute auch inspiriert hier im Saal, um ab heute Nachmittag irgendwie etwas im Placemaking zu starten in einer Rolle wie STIPO. Und du bist ein bisschen bescheiden in deiner Rolle da in der ganzen Placemaking-Geschichte. Aber ich habe eine direkte Frage eigentlich an dich. Wie verdient STIPO ihr Geld? Hoe verdien je je geld?
Yeah, very Dutch question to ask, right? But we're among country fellows here, but it's a super good question as well, because we get that question a lot. Because we have built an entire urban development system where very often there isn't any money for these kinds of processes, or there's no patience for it, or the director says you need to be finished by October. We are a social enterprise, so we're active and of course it helps that we've been doing this for 30 years already. So, you know, we didn't just start yesterday. We have our networks. But we work in assignments on area development, area transformation for municipalities, for real estate developers. But there's also a lot of work to be done, like starting a city maker fund that there's no client for. So our model is that we, if you work full-time in our team, for 3 days a week you're in these assignments, then you have 2 days to work on impact. And hopefully in the assignments we can also do in an impactful way. We don't just take on any assignment. We want to have the feeling that we can engage in these kinds of processes and not waste our time, to be honest. And in order to do that, we're small as well. That's also part of the answer, because we don't want to have to take just any job just for the sake of keeping people to work. But at the same time, and by the way, we hope that there will be more STIPOs, because we need more STIPOs, right? Because 90% of the development is not like this. And with those projects, we don't maximize our profits, but we reinvest that profit into starting a city maker fund or starting Placemaking Europe, which we find important to have as a network. And that's a lot of passion hours, as they call it, or time that we invest. And that's possible thanks to this social enterprise model. Yeah, of course, in the Netherlands, but I guess here as well, for consulting on projects, there is a lot of money available. But I think we also learned to get financial people by our side, because we would be in the situation, see, it's a really good question. We would be in a situation where we would be explaining to a real estate developer or a building owner that we like to engage in these kinds of processes, and really out of passion. And nowadays we have a financial advisor by our side, really specializing in property finance. And he would repeat the same story, but then in the language of the spreadsheets of the real estate developer. And then at the end of the conversation, all of a sudden the real estate developer says, yes, of course we need to do this, because they found a way to convince their bosses. So I think it's very important that every placemaker, in our case, this guy is called Theo Stoutener. Since we met him, a lot of these projects start rolling much more, and we find our ways within the system to create that money, because there is a lot of money. If you look at the value creation on the property side, That's millions of euros, and this was just one of the buildings. So if you have 10 of those buildings, you generate a lot of money. The question only is how to get that money to the front of the process and invest it into the community and placemaking. And in order to do that, you need somebody with a financial mindset by your side, I think. So we always say every placemaker needs their Theo by their side. So maybe the beginning of an answer.
Thank you.
And very nice to meet you.
Thank you very much, Hans. There's only one thing left to me, to thank you for making it to Zurich again. That's the third time. That was last time when we also visited some nice places in Switzerland and Zurich. And I hope you can also take some inspiration to the Netherlands, especially about Genossenschaften, you told me.
Definitely.
And we're happy to have you here and hope that this won't be the last time. And we're sure that it's not.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Okay.